Clouds come in a vast variety of different shapes and types. From wispy thin clouds high up in the sky, to enormous looking towers, to white blankets as far as you can see, to some quite peculiar looking shapes. There is a lot to consider when you want to draw or paint them, and I will do my best to give you a good overview. Hey there, and welcome to my cloud tutorial. I'm eager to teach you lots of useful techniques and fascinating facts. This is one of the most extensive videos that I made so far, but do not be intimidated. I will make sure that everything is still easy to understand. I also encourage you to not skip ahead too much. Some things that I explain will be relevant in later parts of the video. Alright, let's actually start drawing. Thank you. So when people draw clouds without having any broader knowledge or skills, they usually draw something like this round, puffy shape. Especially kids draw them this way. However, clouds are more complex than that. Even cumulus clouds, which is what this cloud is supposed to be. So let's start with the sky colors. A sunny sky around noon is very simple to paint. You just make a gradient from a light to a darker sky blue. Of course, it can have all sorts of other colors too, but I'll talk about it more in a future video. Keep in mind that if you use certain traditional tools like colored pencils, watercolors or the like, you would have to leave out a blank spot where you want to paint the cloud in. Or you paint the cloud at first and add the sky colors in later. First of all, you need to have an idea where the light comes from. Let's say in this case it comes from the upper right corner and slightly from the front. And the view angle is slightly from below, mostly from the side. And then draw a sketch to establish the shape you want to go for. This is optional, but I can recommend it. Just some round, quick lines. Make it look puffy, so avoid too many sharp corners. And the bottom should be a bit flatter. You can also plan out parts of the cloud that should stick out, like in the middle of the cloud, or shift parts at the edge further to the front or back. Time to fill in the sketch we made with an opaque textured brush. I'm not perfectly following the sketch lines, but I add some randomness. Having tools with good cloud-like textures is incredibly helpful here. I'm using white, so the brightest color of this palette. My palette is just a gradient of gray tones with a hint of blue in it. That palette can vary though. I obviously use digital tools here, but a lot of the techniques I'll show are also applicable to traditional tools. For now, I will ignore the bottom of the cloud, we'll get to it later. And then take a soft brush and paint in a lighter gray. You can outline the parts that are closer to the viewer and leave them brighter than the parts that are further behind. Once all the main shapes have been established, erase or turn off the sketch lines. I said that the light comes from the right, so the left parts are darker. The leftmost corner can be fully filled in. Work with circular movements, and imagine the cloud being made of lots of various ball shapes. If you would draw a sphere with that light angle, then you'd add in the shades like this. And that is what I mostly do here, but just with more randomness. The shading decides which parts are more at the front. Let's take this shape here. When I extend the shade towards the right, continuing this wide edge here, then it looks like the left part is at the front. But if I extend the shade to the left, then the right part gets moved to the front. If you have the possibility to switch between bright and dark colors, use it. That way you can create shapes and push them to the front or back, however you like. Also, mix in some faint texture here and there to make it look less flat. What I like to do is to roughly paint in some darker color, switch to the brighter color again and paint some round shapes over it. You don't have to be accurate here. Unless you work with tools that don't really allow you to make adjustments later, then you'd have to plan things out more carefully. Pick a darker color and increase the contrast for some shadow areas, especially for the dents and parts that are blocked by other parts of the cloud. You can use them to give certain shapes more definition, or to push shapes more to the front or back. You want to give your cloud layers and avoid that it looks flat. This looks pretty messy, so let's clean things up. You can smudge to even out some of the shades and push the existing colors. Use a more opaque textured brush to give some of the edges more definition. Do not be afraid to create sharp contrasts when needed. It's good to have a mix of soft and bold shapes. Go and just play around and see what looks nice. Take a step back every now and then to see the cloud as a whole and not get too focused on small details. Also add some little fluffy bits close to the edges. Clouds aren't always just one solid form. Let's take a very dark color and work on the bottom of the cloud. I paint in these streaks and define how large these bottom areas should be. This part, for example, is closer to the front, and so the shadow extends more upwards. Make them fairly flat, not completely though, otherwise it would look unnatural. For some areas you can go even darker. Then smudge and blend to fuse it with the rest of the cloud. Push some of the dark colors up, and vice versa. It's okay if it looks quite smudgy and blurred. Now give me a moment to polish up this painting. As you were able to see, I constantly switched between colors and tools and experimented around with textures and shading. I normally don't have a predefined plan in my head, but I just go and see what I will end up with. Keep in mind that this was just my personal way of painting cumulus clouds. There are many other possible ways and they're all valid. Perhaps I was able to give you a better idea of what kind of techniques you want to go for. Well, there is another very useful, almost essential tool that I'm using, and so do many professionals. References. In the form of pictures, videos, or you sitting outside and looking at the clouds in the sky. It is impossible to memorize every cloud shape and formation. Even for just one cloud type, like cumulus clouds, it would be way too much. There is no shame in using references. Alright, now here are some prepared examples, a couple of cumulus clouds that I painted for my studies. At first these four, with the light coming from the front right. I especially like the form of the second one. These dark shadows make the cloud extra tall looking and gives it more character. Then somewhere the light comes more from the side. Notice that the shadows don't simply go through the middle, but are shifted in all sorts of ways to give the clouds their shape. And in these examples the light comes from behind. That can be one of the cases where it might be better to start with the darkest colors and add the bright ones later to kind of outline the shapes. So to give you an even better understanding of how the shadows change with different light angles, I made this simple 3D model in Blender. It's not particularly realistic looking, I know. There's only so much I can do with my very limited modeling skills, but it is enough to get the point across. I made this because I cannot just move the sun around to get a different light angle on a real-life cloud, but in a 3D modeling software I can move the sun wherever I want, whenever I want. With every frame the light moves around the cloud, as the vertical angle also slowly moves down and then up again. I made sure that the cloud isn't shaped too uniformly so that we get all sorts of shadow formations. Especially interesting parts are the dent at the top, the bit at the right, or the bottom of the cloud. It shows very well that parts of the cloud can cast drop shadows on itself. Also, pay attention to the bottom of the cloud as I further lower the height of the light source. As you can see, it gets brighter and brighter. So the bottom of the cloud is in fact not always dark. At very low light angles, those bottom areas can also get illuminated. Now in real life it would mean that it is sunrise or sunset, so the colors would get very different. Again, this is just a strongly simplified example. Next up I want to explain how cumulus clouds actually form. Yes, this will be a small science lecture now, but no worries, I'll keep it as short and simple as possible. I am convinced that when you have a basic understanding of how the thing you're drawing actually works, you will have an easier time illustrating it. Also, it's fascinating to learn. Alright, so we're starting with the ground. It has all sorts of stuff on it. Forests, fields, houses, streets, hills, water, and so on. All of those areas absorb the sun rays differently, and therefore heat up differently. And as a result, the air above the ground warms up unevenly too. Now, if you have a volume of air that is warmer than its surroundings, it will rise up. That is one of the important basic rules. So that package of air goes up, and it loses heat over time because that heat slowly disperses into the cooler surroundings. Another thing happens though. The higher we go up, the colder the surrounding air is. You are familiar with that effect. The air high up in the mountains is much colder than at sea level. So this fact actually helps the package of warm air to rise further. It just needs to be warmer than the rest of the air. So far I haven't even talked about water yet, but you see, the warm air also carried some water with it. In this illustration the water looks like a blob, but it is actually gaseous and scattered across the whole volume. Drawing it like this just makes it easier to understand. Now here's the thing, a volume of air can carry only a certain amount of water at most. If it exceeds that amount, then it needs to get rid of some water, and that maximum amount depends on the temperature of the air. The colder the air is, the less water it can carry. This rule is super important. Its water capacity shrinks as it cools down. And the opposite applies too. When air warms up, it can carry more water. And this can keep on happening until the capacity is the same as the amount of water it carries. It is full now, so it needs to get rid of some water. But where to? We are high above the ground. Well, there is stuff that we humans cannot see. Dust, pollen, ash, sand, and all sorts of other tiny particles. The water will simply cling on those and become fluid. It condensates. Very small droplets are flying around in the air now, and that is exactly what we can see. That is what we call a cloud. We can see those tiny droplets because they are large enough to scatter the sunlight into all directions, and they appear white simply because the sunlight is white. And, well, that process can keep on going and going until the air package has reached the same temperature as the surroundings. This is how cumulus clouds can form. If you know these basics, then you will have an easier time understanding other cloud types. There are lots of other factors that directly or indirectly influence these processes, like mountains for example that force the air to rise up and drop down again. But let's not make this too complicated. I'm only explaining the very basics and encourage you to learn more about clouds afterwards. Now that you know how these clouds are made, let's watch some time-lapse videos of the process happening in real life. Special thanks to Dr. Mel Strong for permitting me to show these videos. You can find more on his YouTube channel, together with a very good scientific lecture series about weather and climate. It helped me a lot to better understand clouds and all sorts of mechanisms related to them. So here you can see the cumulus clouds popping up in the sky, growing, and eventually dispersing again. Some of them don't get very big, and others keep on growing and form these big towers. When the cloud's lifespan ends, it scatters into these fuzzy bits before it completely disappears. Also, look at what height level these clouds are at. Especially the flat bottoms, they are about the same height, not exactly the same of course, but they are not scattered all over the place. Also, the wind makes these clouds move across the sky even while they're still growing. Air doesn't only rise up perfectly straight, like in my simple illustrations. Pay attention to the shadows too. If you're having problems understanding how clouds are shaped in still images, then these kinds of videos will give you a much better idea. I could stay here and look at this forever. It's so mesmerizing. But we gotta move on. Next up I want to show you some artworks I made with various view angles and daytimes. These are important factors too, after all. Let's go high up in the skies and look at the cumulus clouds from above. You can't see the bottom of the clouds, and now you more so need to think about how wide they are, rather than their height. If you make an image with that kind of view angle, adding some clouds here and there is a great tool for conveying the feeling that you are high up in the sky. The main object should not get too much blocked by them though. Here is another one, although in this artwork the clouds look quite warped. This was my attempt to imitate a fisheye lens image. Not the easiest, I gotta say. Let's look at them from the opposite side, directly from below. Notice that they are significantly darker now. We mostly see the dark bottoms in this case. Also, keep in mind that perspective plays an important role too. Not only do the clouds that are further away get smaller on your canvas, but also the view angle changes. You can see that the clouds in the lower left corner are shown more from their side. Another example here, although this one is actually a reflection of the sky. Here I transitioned from a more random distribution in the lower part of the image to sort of a line structure the further away the clouds appear. By the way, a lot of these artworks are also available in my merch shop, and for some of them I actually made some music tracks for a cloud-themed album. They even have their own music videos where I show and explain the drawing process as a time-lapse. You are able to find all the relevant links down below in the description. Okay, let's take a look at different date times now. They have a huge influence on the colors and shadows of the clouds. First up, nighttime. Now normally it would be too dark to clearly see the clouds, so this picture is actually not very accurate. The clouds are way too bright looking. But you don't have to always be super accurate when you make art. You just want to have a pleasing looking end result, right? The color palette for the clouds is still a bit darker though, and more shifted towards blue. And then there's the sunset, or sunrise, both are mostly the same in terms of colors. I also want to mention that this artwork was a speed paint, which means I only spent a short amount of time on this. If an artwork looks a bit sloppier and less detailed, then that's why. Alright, so the colors are obviously much more on the orange and yellow side now. The bottoms of the clouds get more light too because of the flat angle of the sun rays. It kind of looks like dark clouds with bright outlines, at least from this perspective with the sun behind the clouds. The shadows still have a hint of blue or purple in them though. Very thin clouds don't really have shadows though, so those appear completely bright. Only the big ones have those dark shadows. So your color palette would go from a bright yellow to orange and then to a grayish dark purple. The next example is quite unrealistic, not just because of the cat in the flying box, but also because of the cloud colors. The scene kind of looks like it could be during a sunset, however the clouds and shading aren't accurate at all. But who cares? I also want to show you that you can go into all sorts of directions. Learn the rules and then feel free to break them however you want. I wanted this picture to look more dreamlike, and the soft gradient of warm colors was well suited for that. And obviously you could drift even further away from realism by going for some kind of stylized way of drawing. A good example would be the artwork that I made as a banner for YouTube and my social media pages. At the left it starts with realistic looking clouds, then goes to a simpler cel-shaded style where the colors are clearly separated and don't blend together. Next is some kind of old European style. The line hatching is quite characteristic for that period. And at the very right I drew them in an East Asian style with bold line weights and lots of whirly shapes. The trail behind the flying little mink also has its own colorful and whimsical style. There are so many different ways to draw and paint clouds, far more than I can show you in this video. Go for the style that suits you best. Alright, we talked about all sorts of different ways to draw cumulus clouds, but that is just one cloud type out of many. So let's take a look. We're still staying within the cumulus category. Yes, there are other kinds of cumulus clouds. The cumulus clouds we looked at so far were pretty low in the atmosphere. There are 3 height levels that we're going to look at. They're just called low, mid and high. All of those levels are in the troposphere. It's the lowest layer of the atmosphere right above the ground. Those height levels don't have clearly defined heights. The in-between boundaries are kind of blurry at times. And the maximum height of the troposphere actually depends on where you are on this planet. Around the equator it's about 18 kilometers high. But at the polar regions, it's only about 6 kilometers. So normal cumulus clouds are found at low heights. If they are formed at mid-levels, then they are called alto-cumulus. And at high altitudes, they are cirro-cumulus. Those prefixes, alto and cirro, are used for those specific height levels. You will hear these terms later for other cloud types. These cumulus clouds usually come in patterns, small clouds that are repeated next to each other. Those patterns can be more spotty and random, or come in these wavy rows. They don't cover the entire sky, so even though they are wide, they are not that wide, and you can see the clouds fade out at the edges and become more faint and scattered. Alto-cumulus and Cirro-cumulus look very similar. They are basically the same, just at different heights. But the Cirro-cumulus clouds are smaller, which causes them to not have shadows. So if you ever look up and wonder which one of the two it is, look out for the shadows. Alto-cumulus have shading and Cirro-cumulus do not. Here are some examples of artworks that I made with these cloud patterns. This one shows some Alto-cumulus clouds which become more faded far away in the distance. You can see that I followed wavy lines that are denser the further away they are. And this one shows the clouds from above, a very dense pattern this time where the clouds basically touch each other. You can still see a certain flow of lines. I had to paint the ridges darker to show this pattern properly. Now there are basically two different ways to paint those, either additive or subtractive. What do I mean by that? Well, with additive, I mean that you paint one cloud after another. Making some sketch lines to follow can be very helpful. Then you simply make those random small cloud shapes while you roughly follow those lines. Subtractive means that you paint in a whole area and then erase the gaps between the clouds. Or instead of erasing, you actually paint the sky colors in between the clouds and form the pattern that way. In any case, it is important that you add some randomness to your pattern. You don't want them to look too perfect and artificial. So which method of the two is better? That kind of depends. Sometimes I personally find the subtractive method easier for creating more natural looking patterns, even though it takes longer. However, if the clouds overlap each other a lot, then the additive way could be better. Or you go for a mix of both of those methods, for example here to round the edges. By the way, these patterns can also occur at low altitudes. In that case, they are called stratocumulus. They can look like a dense blanket of clouds, but if you look closely, it is still possible to distinguish the individual cloud shapes. The mechanisms behind these patterned clouds are a bit more complicated. They can form from turbulent vertical air currents, or from other cloud types like Alto-stratus or Contrails, which disperse and scatter over time. More about those other clouds soon though. There is one important cumulus cloud type left. We covered all the individual height levels, but the next one grows across all of them, the Cumulonimbus Cloud. The nimbus part of the name, which is Latin for dark cloud, indicates that it can create precipitation, so rain or snow. All the previous clouds are actually not rain clouds. Clouds need to be quite tall to create ice crystals and droplets large enough to fall all the way down to the ground. I will talk more about the process behind it in a future tutorial video about rain. So Cumulonimbus clouds are formed like regular cumulus clouds, but in this case they just keep on growing. The conditions are perfect for them, so they don't really stop. Well, at a certain height they will be forced to stop. You see, there is a reason why we distinguish between the troposphere, the layer in which all the clouds are, and the stratosphere, the layer above it. When you step over the boundary, all of a sudden the temperature of the surrounding air actually goes up. Yes, you heard right. The rule that I mentioned before is actually not a general rule. It has to do with the oxygen-ozone cycle in the stratosphere, which absorbs highly energetic and dangerous ultraviolet radiation from the sun and generates heat in return. So at that temperature inversion, the cloud quickly stops rising and a so-called anvil is formed at the top. The cloud flows to the side and creates a relatively flat plateau. Another key detail is the fact that the cloud looks kind of fuzzy and washed out further up. That is because we have tiny ice crystals instead of droplets. It's so high that the cold air causes the water to freeze. So if you see a cloud with sharp looking edges, then it's droplets. If it's fuzzy looking, then it's ice. time to check out some examples again. I painted a huge and kind of intimidating one here. Because of their large size, they also have a lot of shadows. I exaggerated the anvil and stretched it out a lot, basically covering the entire sky. And I added a couple of regular cumulus clouds around the same height as the bottom of the cumulonimbus to add more variety. The colors are also not quite realistic. I mostly alternated between blue and purple and tried to create some cool looking textures, and the bottom of the large clouds looks especially dark. Here are some crazy ones. I created this fantasy scenario that a fire cat heats up a tank in which a water otter has a nice relaxing bath. That otter can create huge amounts of water, which evaporates and gets released outside high up in the mountains. And then flying ice penguins come in and add the ice crystals that are necessary for creating rain. Or something like that. It's not really supposed to make all that much sense. In this case, these clouds don't have the flat bottom like normal cumulonimbus clouds, but otherwise they are still shaped the same way. I even made the top parts a bit smudgy looking. So if you want to paint something epic looking, then cumulonimbus clouds are perfectly suited for that. Alright, that was all of the main cumulus cloud types. However, there are still a lot of other clouds. So moving on to the next type, which is stratus clouds. Those are wide blankets of clouds. They can cover the entire sky and it's often hard to see where they end, unlike cumulus clouds. This time, let me actually show you how they are formed at first. For that purpose, let's take a look at some global weather data. We're gonna need to think big this time. We look at a temperature map and switch the height to 700 hectopascal, which is a few kilometers high up. At that altitude, the wind gets much less disturbed by stuff at ground or sea level. So you can see these blue caps that are on and around the North and South Pole. That's cold air that also constantly rotates and creates these ever-changing wavy borders. Then we also got warm air flowing around in between. Now what can happen is that those cold and warm air masses collide and mix together. When warm air flows into an area with cold air, then it's called a warm front. And when cold air flows into warm air, then it's a cold front. One of the best examples is this area between Europe and North America. This is where often so-called mid-latitude cyclones are formed. Those happen when cold air from the polar regions flows southwards and warm air flows towards the north. Then you have warm and cold fronts dancing around in circles. Now, what do these fronts do? Well, let's start with a cold front. On one side we have warm air, and on the other a wall of cold air is approaching. When they collide, the cold air will dig under the warm air, pushing the warm air up. Well, we already know what happens when warm air rises. Clouds can be made. And since the air goes up so steeply, it's cumulus clouds that are made, huge ones. A lot of them will reach cumulonimbus size. And the line where the cold air creates this wall along the ground is defined as the cold front. Alright, now the warm front. This is where it gets even more interesting. When the warm air approaches the cold air mass, instead of creating a wall, the warm air climbs over the cold air at a very slight angle. So this usually stretches over long distances. And once again we have rising warm air, but it rises much slower than with a cold front. Let's start at the very top. The warm air has risen only a little bit at very high altitudes. As a result, we get so-called cirrus clouds. Those are a category of their own. They look wispy, sometimes stringy, can have hooks and textures, and are generally quite chaotic. I cannot possibly show and explain all of the various shapes that they can have. Then the next layer, which is Cirrus Stratus. Now the stratus type clouds finally start. This is a thin blanket of clouds at high altitudes, so thin that you can still clearly see the sun and even the moon through it, and additionally they can create a halo around them. The light gets reflected and refracted by the ice crystals of the Cirrus Stratus, which forms this ring. You can even faintly see the various colors. It's basically the same principle as with rainbows. Then we go further down the slope. The thickness of the cloud layer increases and we got Alto-cumulus Clouds. Those are thicker, but you can still faintly see the sun through them a lot of times. And then we got stratus clouds, which are spanned over almost the whole troposphere. In this case, you don't see the sun anymore, but only a grey continuous blanket in the sky. If those clouds get thick enough, then they can create precipitation. In that case, they are called Nimbus Stratus. Now, where do we draw the line for the warm front? Again, at the spot where it touches the ground, so all the way where we have the stratus and Nimbus Stratus clouds. Let's compare now with some satellite pictures. These are photos made by NASA. It's several photos stitched together, so that's why there are those cuts through the images. We're gonna take a look at the cyclone from before again. With what we have learned, even without any temperature data, we can tell where the cold and warm fronts approximately are. So we got lots of spots around here. Kind of looks like a web. Those are all Cumulus and Cumulonimbus Clouds. The line for the cold front would run along where the spotty pattern starts. And further ahead you can see this dense wall of clouds. At first it looks a bit fuzzier, that's where we got the Cirrus and Cirrus Stratus clouds. And then it gets impossible to look through them, so it is hard to tell where the Alto-stratus, Stratus and Nimbus Stratus start and stop. These fronts can catch up to each other and partially merge, and they are not limited to those kinds of cyclones. I'm not gonna go into detail about those mechanics though. Let's go ahead and take a look at some artwork examples again. In this one, the clouds aren't really the focus, but it is an example nonetheless. I painted some cirrus clouds by faintly drawing random wispy shapes all over the place. Just take a bright color and very softly paint in these shapes. Do not go for high opacity. I got some other practice drawing such examples. The neat thing about cirrus clouds is that you can be very liberal with how you shape them. Let's mix in some stylized versions. I particularly like how these have turned out, a mix between wind lines and cloud shapes. Now onto the stratus type examples. Going the same order as before with the warm fronts, we have the Cirrus Stratus. A completely grey image except for the halo around the sun. The clouds themselves look very faint, only some slight wavy textures, and they are spanned across the entire sky. And you see that the sun still looks very bright and shiny, even though it is behind the Cirrus Stratus clouds. The next one has a rather intimidating vibe, a drawing I made during Halloween time as an example for Alto-stratus clouds. This time there is no halo, and the sun or moon, it's up to you to decide, looks rather hazy. The clouds themselves only have a little bit of texture, for the most part they are just a grey blanket. Alright, the clouds keep on thickening. Next up there are some dense stratus clouds, and we got the sunset scene again. Even though the stratus clouds cover the majority of the sky, sunlight, when the sun is very low, can still hit the bottom of the clouds. The result is this beautiful wavy pattern of orange, red and dark purple. The parts of the cloud that hang a bit lower get illuminated, while the rest has these strongly contrasting shadows. If you paint stratus clouds during daytime, you see way less texture. This here is basically what you would paint, just a smudgy blanket. Perspective still plays a role. You can see that they follow horizontal lines that get denser the further away the clouds are. But other than that, there really isn't much to it. Here is another example. I actually increased the amount of textures because otherwise it would have looked too boring. Those kind of clouds were well suited for the melancholic mood of the setting, which is even further underlined with the music that I made based on this artwork. Alright, so we had Cumulus, Stratus and Cirrus clouds so far. Next up I want to show you some more special individual cloud types. So let's continue with these funky ones. Those are so-called lenticular clouds. Lenticular means lentil shaped, which I can kinda see, but it's still a weird name for a cloud. Oh well. Technically they are cumulus clouds, but they obviously look very unique. They can occur in any of the 3 height levels and are formed above mountains and tall buildings that disrupt the airflow. So instead of a steady flow, you get wavy currents going up and down, and whenever the air rises up, it can form clouds. The conditions have to be just right though. That also means that lenticular clouds can appear in a line of several clouds. Their visual characteristic is clearly the smooth texture and disc-like shape. And yes, way too many people mistake and report them as UFOs. Imagine by how much you could reduce those kind of reports if you just properly educated people. Anyways, here is my own version of a lenticular cloud artwork. A nice hat, wouldn't you say? And those clouds can also be stacked above each other, which of course casts a shadow on the lower ones. You gotta take that into consideration. Even though the texture of these clouds is so much simpler, it can be a bit of a challenge to get the shapes and shading right. Well, in the world of art, you are not limited to mountains or buildings for tall objects that can disrupt the airflow. How about a huge void kitty instead? A weird choice, you say? Well, I say why not? Doesn't it look cute with its cloudy head? You wouldn't want to upset it, right? Moving on to the next cloud type. These ones are extra fascinating looking. They are called Mammatus Clouds, which basically means mammary clouds. I'm not going to explain why, I hope it is obvious enough. They don't come by themselves, but rather in combination with other cloud types. The most common would be the base of Cumulonimbus Clouds. The scientists aren't exactly sure what the mechanism behind the formation is, instead we get a wide variety of hypotheses. I'm not gonna dive deeper into this right now. The oversimplified version is that pockets of cold air sink down and create these blobs. When you see those in real life, better prepare yourself for a particularly severe storm approaching. Painting them is not too complicated. You have those round shapes and create a contrast between the low-hanging parts and the ridges between those blobs. Which way you paint the contrast can be up to you though. The ridges could be the darker parts or the more illuminated parts. It kind of looks like someone inverted the colors in that case. I took this concept into a rather freaky direction. Another painting that I made during Halloween time. Instead of clouds, these are the tortured souls from the other side. Or something like that. I had my fun with this one, although I definitely overdid it with the amount of details. Oh well. But you can see that the shading was still done the same way. You got dark blobs hanging down, and the areas between them looks kind of glowy. An easy way to paint a pattern like this is to cover everything with the bright color at first, and then paint the round shapes over it. They have a sharp edge at the bottom and fade into the brighter color further up. The next one I want to shortly show off is actually not really a cloud type, but more so a huge storm. Hurricanes, or tropical cyclones. I made this artwork that shows the eye of the hurricane storm, that hole in the middle that can actually let you see the sky in the midst of this extreme storm. And once again I added a void kitty, because why not? Secret pro artist tip: if you want to make your artwork better looking by miles, just add an enormous black hat into it. Simple. The next cloud type is actually not natural. These long lines of clouds that are left behind airplanes, condensation trails, or in short, contrails. They are not hard to understand. Hot air gets released by the turbines, which rapidly cools down. That hot air also carries some water with it, partially from the combustion process itself, and that water can condensate under the right conditions and form clouds. So contrails are just clouds, just water. They're not chemtrails or some other ridiculous conspiracy theory thing. The burning of kerosene only creates CO2 and water, and the CO2 is invisible, and also creates its own kind of problems by contributing to global warming. Painting them is honestly pretty simple. You leave a small gap between the turbine and then use a textured brush to create those lines. They make a short gradient until they reach maximum opacity. They also don't really show shadows in most cases. The further away they are from the airplane, so the more time has passed, the more these clouds spread out and get wider. They can also form stripy and spotty patterns and be dragged around by wind currents. This means that they can also become Alto- and Cirro-cumulus clouds. Contrails are a really convenient tool for breaking up your composition. Having a line or several lines in the sky can look very pleasing. It's a good idea to combine them with other cloud types, like for example here with this tiger drawing from before. It's not quite obvious, but there is also a contrail drawing a line through the cloudscape. Or let's take this rather simple looking artwork, which I made as a cover for my original music album. They even form a musical stave. Composition is hard to fully comprehend. I can't quite explain why it looks better if you draw a line through an artwork in certain ways. There are some rules that you can follow, but I'd say it often comes down to experience and simple trial and error. Therefore, making a sketch beforehand can be a good idea. That's all the cloud artworks from me, but that was far from all the cloud types that exist. Just to quickly name a couple more. There are pyrocumulus, cumulus clouds that form above large fires, like forest fires. Again, rising hot air, you know? And that air is not dry, although you might think so. Or Arcus clouds, also called roll clouds for obvious reasons. Asperitas clouds are a fascinating subspecies of stratus clouds. The wavy pattern looks beautiful. And there are many others, lots of rare types too. I'd love to paint all of them and come up with various interesting ideas to implement them into my artworks. But those pictures you have seen already took me several months in total. I kind of overdid it. However, if you practice the basic cloud types like Cumulus Clouds, then you're going to have an easier time painting more unusual kinds. Or invent some fantasy clouds. That's the great thing about art. You are not bound to the limitations of reality. Let your imagination go wild. I hope I was able to share my fascination with clouds. They don't get enough attention in my opinion. Their shapes can be so beautiful looking. Next time when you make a landscape painting or something similar, perhaps give your clouds a bigger role than usual. Perhaps even the main role. They deserve it. And I also hope that you are now motivated to learn more about weather and climate too. Not only is it really fascinating, but also important to know. Especially nowadays when so much misinformation gets thrown around by people who don't even know the difference between weather and climate. Learn from professional teachers and scientists, not politicians or extremely biased journalists. Well, if you like this tutorial and want to support my work, consider becoming a patron. I want to make so many more videos, like about rain, lightning, ice crystals and other cool weather-related stuff. And of course about other topics too. If you cannot afford joining Patreon, no problem. There are many other ways to support me. You can leave a nice comment, give this video a like, share it with your friends. I highly appreciate any form of support. That's it for this video. Let me know how you liked it and leave your constructive feedback down below. Thank you a lot for watching and have fun drawing.